In the mountains of Northern California, at the Blackwater Federal Training Facility, most people knew Samantha Lopez as the quiet woman who cleaned the rifles. What they didn't know was that she was about to become the only thing standing between them and a coordinated terrorist attack that would change everything. This is the story of how an underestimated maintenance worker became an unlikely hero when the unthinkable happened. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., but Samantha Lopez was already awake. She'd been staring at the ceiling of her small apartment for the past hour, listening to the pre-dawn silence that reminded her of hunting trips with her grandfather in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. By 5:45 a.m., she was walking through the gates of the Blackwater Federal Training Facility, her security badge barely earning a glance from the guards who'd seen her make this same journey every weekday for the past 18 months. The facility sprawled across 200 acres of rugged California terrain, a place where federal agents, military contractors, and law enforcement personnel came to hone their skills with some of the most advanced weaponry in the world. Samantha's destination was Building C, a concrete structure housing the Weapons Maintenance Department. While others prepared for tactical training exercises or attended briefings on the latest counter-terrorism protocols, she would spend her day in a sterile room filled with cleaning supplies, tool benches, and rifles that required meticulous care. "Morning, Lopez," grunted Marcus Chun, the facility's head of security, as he passed her in the hallway. He barely looked up from his tablet, already focused on the day's training schedule. To him, she was just another piece of the facility's infrastructure, necessary but unremarkable. The weapons maintenance room was Samantha's domain, though she shared it with two other technicians, Jake Morrison, a former Army mechanic who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his deployment stories, and Ashley Williams, a recent technical college graduate who treated the job like a stepping stone to something better. "Hey Sam," Ashley called out as Samantha entered, using the nickname that somehow made her feel even more invisible. "Director Hamilton wants all the AR-15 spotless for today's VIP demonstration. Some big shots from Washington are coming to observe the new tactical response training." Samantha nodded silently, hanging her jacket on the designated hook and retrieving her toolkit from its locked cabinet. The AR-15s were arranged on a long table, each one requiring a complete breakdown, cleaning, and reassembly. To most people, they looked identical, black, angular, purposeful. But Samantha could see the subtle differences: slight wear patterns on the charging handles, microscopic scratches on the bolt carriers, the way each weapon's weight distributed differently when properly balanced. As she began her work, Jake launched into another story about his time overseas. "I remember this one firefight in Kandahar," he said, addressing Ashley while pointedly ignoring Samantha. "Insurgents had us pinned down behind this concrete barrier, and my squad leader turns to me and says, 'Morrison, think you can put some rounds on that building at 300 meters?' Of course, I grabbed my M4 and—" Samantha's hands moved with practiced efficiency as Jake's voice faded into background noise. She'd heard variations of this story dozens of times, each retelling adding new embellishments that made Jake sound more heroic. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Samantha could recite every technical specification of the weapons he claimed to have mastered, could field strip them blindfolded, and had once put 10 rounds through a target the size of a quarter at distances that would make Jake's 300-meter shot look like child's play. But that was a lifetime ago, before everything changed. "Lopez," Director Hamilton's voice cut through the morning routine. Robert Hamilton was a former FBI agent who'd taken over facility operations 2 years earlier. He was the kind of man who measured competence by how loudly someone spoke and how many credentials they could recite. I need these weapons inspection ready by noon. We've got senators, Pentagon officials, and media representatives coming through. Everything needs to be perfect. Yes, sir, Samantha replied quietly, not looking up from the rifle she was meticulously cleaning. Hamilton had already moved on, barking orders at other staff members about security protocols and demonstration schedules. Must be nice to have such simple responsibilities, Ashley muttered once Hamilton was out of earshot. No pressure, no deadlines that actually matter. She was preparing for her firearms instructor certification exam and had been increasingly resentful of what she perceived as Samantha's easy job. Samantha continued working, her cloth moving in precise circles around the rifle's barrel. She could have pointed out that weapons maintenance required extensive knowledge of ballistics, mechanical engineering, and metallurgy. She could have mentioned that a single missed detail in her work could result in weapon malfunctions that endangered lives. Instead, she remained silent, finding peace in the familiar rhythm of disassembly and cleaning. The truth was, Samantha Lopez had chosen invisibility. After what happened in Afghanistan 3 years ago, after the medals and commendations and interviews, she'd requested the most anonymous position she could find. Weapons maintenance at a training facility seemed perfect, important work that served her country. But without the spotlight that had nearly destroyed her dot at 10:30 a.m., the first wave of VIP visitors arrived. Through the weapons room's reinforced window, Samantha watched black SUVs pull up to the main building. Men and women in expensive suits emerged, flanked by security details and followed by journalists carrying cameras. She recognized a few faces from news broadcasts. Senator Patricia Goldman from the Armed Services Committee, Deputy Secretary of Defense William Cross, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the nation's leading expert on domestic terrorism threats. Big day for the facility, Jake commented, pressing his face against the window. Bet they're here to see the new urban warfare simulator. Morrison's been bragging about the new equipment for weeks. Training Supervisor Morrison, no relation to Jake despite the shared surname, was the facility's golden boy. A former Navy SEAL with movie star looks and a natural talent for self-promotion. He'd been featured in several military magazines and had a growing social media following. If there were cameras at the facility, David Morrison would inevitably be in front of them. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison's amplified voice echoed across the facility's PA system. Welcome to Blackwater Federal Training Facility, where America's finest prepare for the challenges of modern security threats. Today, you'll witness training exercises that represent the cutting edge of tactical response protocols. Samantha returned to her work, but something felt different. Maybe it was the unusual number of vehicles in the parking lot, or the fact that several maintenance workers had called in sick, leaving the facility understaffed. She'd learned to trust subtle warning signs during her time in combat zones, and right now, those instincts were whispering that something wasn't quite right. At 11:15 a.m., she finished the last rifle inspection and began organizing the weapons for transport to the demonstration range. Each rifle was tagged, logged, and arranged in protective cases according to Hamilton's obsessively detailed specifications. The work was methodical, almost meditative, and helped quiet the nagging feeling that had been growing stronger all morning. That's when she heard the first explosion. The building shook violently, causing rifle cases to slide across the metal table. Emergency lights immediately activated, bathing the weapons room in harsh red illumination. Through the window, Samantha could see smoke rising from the main administration building. What the hell was that? Jake shouted, stumbling as another explosion rocked the facility. Ashley was already moving toward the emergency exit, her face pale with panic. We need to get out of here. This could be a gas leak or... That wasn't a gas leak, Samantha said quietly, her voice cutting through their panic with unexpected authority. She was staring out the window, watching figures in tactical gear emerge from the smoke. They moved with military precision, but something about their formation patterns was wrong. This wasn't a rescue operation. The facility's PA system crackled to life, but instead of Director Hamilton's voice or an emergency announcement, they heard something that made Samantha's blood run cold. "Attention, citizens of the American Empire," a electronically distorted voice announced. "The Blackwater facility is now under the control of the Revolutionary Liberation Front. Your government's tools of oppression will be destroyed, and those who serve the military-industrial complex will face justice." Jake's face had gone white. "Terrorists," he whispered. "Jesus Christ, we're under attack by actual terrorists." Through the window, Samantha could see the attackers moving between buildings with practiced coordination. They wore military-style gear but carried weapons she didn't recognize, likely foreign manufacture, possibly modified. This wasn't a random attack. It was a carefully planned operation. The lights went out as the attackers cut power to the building. Emergency backup systems kicked in, providing minimal illumination. In the distance, automatic gunfire echoed across the facility grounds. Ashley was crying now, her hands shaking as she tried to call 911 on her cell phone. "No signal," she sobbed. "They must have jammed the towers." Samantha moved to the weapons cabinet and began entering her access code. Her hands were steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Jake grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "We need to evacuate the rifles," Samantha said simply. "We can't let them fall into the wrong hands." "Are you insane? Those things aren't even loaded. We need to run." But Samantha was already moving, gathering ammunition from the secure storage locker. Jake and Ashley watched in shock as their quiet colleague transformed before their eyes. Her movements became fluid and purposeful, her expression focused in a way they'd never seen before. Outside, the sounds of battle were getting closer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first thing Samantha noticed about the attackers was their tactical spacing. Through the reinforced window of the weapons room, she watched them advance in a modified diamond formation, each member maintaining precise distance intervals that maximized coverage while minimizing exposure to crossfire. This wasn't amateur hour. These were professionals with serious military training. "Samantha, what are you doing?" Ashley's voice cracked with terror as she watched her colleague methodically loading magazines with 223 ammunition. "We need to hide, not fight. Security will handle this." But security was already down. Through the chaos outside, Samantha could see the bodies of 2 guards sprawled near the main gate, their radios silent. The attackers had taken out communications first, then the perimeter, and now they were systematically clearing buildings. Standard military doctrine, executed with chilling efficiency. Jake Morrison had pressed himself against the far wall, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "This is insane," he muttered, watching Samantha chamber around in the R-15 with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. "Where did you learn to do that?" Samantha didn't answer. She was counting attackers through the window, 6 visible, but intelligence suggested cells typically operated in groups of 8 to 12. That meant at least 2 more somewhere, probably covering escape routes or handling demolitions. The smoke rising from the administration building confirmed her suspicions about explosive charges. The facility's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. Through the PA system, which the terrorists had clearly hijacked, came another announcement. Phase 1 complete. Beginning systematic neutralization of remaining resistance. Any federal personnel who surrender will be processed according to revolutionary justice protocols. "Revolutionary justice," Samantha whispered, recognizing the phrase from intelligence briefings she'd attended in another life. The Revolutionary Liberation Front was a domestic terrorist organization that had then growing bolder over the past 2 years. They'd claimed responsibility for attacks on military recruiting stations and defense contractor facilities, but nothing on this scale. This was an escalation that would reshape how the government approached domestic terrorism. Ashley was hyperventilating. Now her breathing shallow and rapid. "They're going to kill us all, aren't they? We're going to die in here." "Not if I can help it," Samantha said, slinging the rifle across her shoulder and moving to the weapons cabinet. She pulled out 2 additional firearms, a compact submachine gun and a precision rifle with a high-powered scope. Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Since when do you know about weapons selection for combat scenarios? I thought you just cleaned them." Through the window, Samantha watched the attackers split into 2 teams. One group was heading toward the vehicle depot where dozens of federal agents were attending a training seminar. The other was moving directly toward their building. Time was running out. "Listen carefully," Samantha said, her voice carrying an authority that neither Jake nor Ashley had ever heard before. "There's a service tunnel that connects this building to the main complex. It's behind the supply closet. Ashley, I need you to take Jake and get to the tunnel. Follow it east until you reach the emergency exit near the communications tower." "What about you?" Ashley asked, though her tears had stopped and her voice had steadied. Something about Samantha's calm competence was infectious. "I'm going to buy you time." Jake finally found his voice. "Buy us time?" "Samantha, these are trained terrorists with military weapons. You're a maintenance worker. This isn't some action movie." For the first time since the attack began, Samantha looked directly at him. In her eyes, Jake saw something that made him step backward involuntarily. It wasn't fear or panic or the wild desperation of someone in over their head. It was cold, calculated assessment, the look of someone evaluating threats and formulating responses. "Trust me," she said simply. The sound of footsteps in the hallway cut short any further discussion. Heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with tactical precision. The attackers had reached their floor. Samantha moved to position herself behind an overturned table that would provide cover while maintaining sight lines to both entrances. She gestured for Jake and Ashley to move toward the supply closet. "Go, now don't look back." Ashley hesitated for a moment, studying Samantha's face. "Who are you really?" But there was no time for answers. The door to the weapons room exploded inward as the terrorists deployed a breaching charge. Smoke and debris filled the air, and through the chaos came the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire. Samantha's response was immediate and devastating. The first attacker through the door never knew what hit him. Samantha's shot took him center mass before he could acquire a target. The second terrorist had a split second to register his teammate's fall before Samantha's follow-up shot dropped him as well. "Contact! Building C, weapons room." The third attacker shouted into his radio as he dove for cover behind a support pillar. "2 down, repeat 2 down. We have serious resistance." Jake and Ashley had frozen near the supply closet, staring in shock at the scene unfolding before them. The quiet woman who had cleaned their rifles every day had just neutralized 2 armed terrorists with precision that bordered on supernatural. "Move!" Samantha shouted without taking her eyes off the doorway. "I said move!" The authority in her voice snapped them out of their paralysis. Ashley grabbed Jake's arm and dragged him toward the supply closet as another explosion shook the building. More attackers were coming, and they would be prepared for resistance now. Samantha keyed her rifle's optics and settled into a firing position that maximized her cover while maintaining visual command of all approaches. Through her scope, she could see the third attacker speaking rapidly into his radio. She could read his lips well enough to know he was calling for backup and reporting unexpected resistance from trained personnel. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 18 months, everyone at this facility had seen her as anything but trained personnel. She was the invisible woman who maintained their weapons, The quiet technician who never spoke up in meetings. The anonymous employee who could be safely ignored. Now, as she prepared for what would likely be her final stand, Samantha reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she'd been Captain Samantha Lopez, 75th Ranger Regiment, with a service record that included 3 combat deployments and decorations for valor that she'd never wanted. The raid in Afghanistan that had made her a hero had also made her a target, not just for enemy forces, but for a media attention that had nearly destroyed her. The congressional testimony had been the final straw. Sitting in a hearing room while politicians used her military service as a prop for their political agendas, she'd realized that she couldn't continue being a symbol when all she'd ever wanted was to serve quietly and effectively. So she'd requested transfer to the most anonymous position she could find. Weapons maintenance at a training facility where she could use her technical knowledge to support other warriors without being in the spotlight herself. Now, as she heard the approach of additional attackers in the hallway, Samantha understood that her peaceful anonymity was about to end forever. The next wave of terrorists came prepared. Instead of charging through the door, they deployed tactical mirrors to assess the room's layout and identify her position. These weren't the same amateurs who had stumbled into her crosshairs moments. Earlier, Federal agent in the weapons room is displaying advanced tactical knowledge, she heard one of them report. Requesting permission to deploy enhanced countermeasures. Enhanced countermeasures. Samantha's blood chilled as she recognized the terminology. These terrorists had access to military-grade equipment and training that suggested support from hostile foreign actors. This wasn't just a domestic terrorist attack. It was a sophisticated operation designed to test American response capabilities. Through her scope, she watched the attackers deploy what appeared to be a small reconnaissance drone. Within seconds, it would identify her exact position and relay coordinates for a targeted assault that would overwhelm even her considerable skills. Time to change the game, Samantha had noticed. Something during her months of maintaining weapons. At the facility, the building's ventilation system connected directly to the main armory. What the architects had intended as a climate control feature could, in the right circumstances, become a tactical advantage. She fired 3 precisely placed shots into the room's ventilation grate, then lobbed a smoke grenade through the opening. Within seconds, thick white smoke began pouring through the building's air circulation system, creating a fog that would neutralize the attackers' technological advantages. In the confusion that followed, Samantha moved. The ventilation shaft was exactly as narrow as Samantha remembered from the facility blueprints she'd studied during her security orientation 18 months ago. While other employees had dozed through the mandatory briefing, she'd memorized every detail, old habits from her ranger days where knowing your environment could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Moving through the metal ductwork with her rifle secured across her back, Samantha could hear the confused shouts of the terrorists below. The smoke grenades had done more than obscure vision. They'd triggered the facility's fire suppression system, adding water sprinklers to the chaos and forcing the attackers to recalculate their approach. Target has gone mobile. The voice echoed through the building's compromised PA system. Repeat. Federal agent has left the weapons room. All teams maintain vigilance for flanking maneuvers. Samantha paused at a junction in the ventilation system, listening to the tactical chatter filtering through the building. The terrorists were using military communication protocols, but with subtle variations that suggested foreign training. Russian methodology, possibly Spetsnaz-influenced techniques adapted for domestic operations. This confirmed her growing suspicion that the Revolutionary Liberation Front was receiving support from hostile nation-states. Through a grate beneath her, she could see into the facility's main corridor. 3 terrorists were advancing in formation, their weapons raised and their movement disciplined. But their positioning revealed a critical flaw. They were expecting resistance from the front or sides, not from above. Samantha quietly removed the ventilation grate and dropped into the corridor behind them. The first terrorist never heard her coming. Her knife, a compact tactical blade she'd carried since Afghanistan, slid between his ribs with surgical precision. The second attacker turned at the sound of his teammates' collapse, but Samantha was already moving. A swift strike to his larynx collapsed his windpipe, ensuring he couldn't raise an alarm before losing consciousness. The third terrorist had better reflexes. He managed to turn and bring his weapon to bear, but Samantha was no longer where he expected. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught her that in confined spaces, mobility trumped firepower. She closed the distance before he could acquire a proper sight picture, redirecting his rifle barrel with one hand while driving her elbow into his solar plexus with the other. Within 30 seconds, 3 armed terrorists had been neutralized by a woman they would have dismissed as a maintenance worker if they'd bothered to notice her at all. Samantha quickly stripped the attackers of their communication equipment and weapons. The radios were military-grade, encrypted with frequencies that matched nothing in the federal database. Their rifles were modified AK variants with Cyrillic markings that had been filed off, definitely foreign manufacture, possibly supplied through black market arms dealers with ties to Eastern European criminal networks. But it was the tactical gear that made her blood run cold. Each terrorist wore body armor with ceramic plate inserts designed to stop rifle rounds, and their load-bearing equipment included flashbang grenades, breaching charges, and what appeared to be chemical agents in unmarked containers. This wasn't just a terrorist attack. It was a field test of advanced asymmetric warfare tactics against American security infrastructure. Delta Team, report status. A voice crackled through the captured radio. Samantha keyed the microphone, altering her voice to match the gravelly tone of the terrorist she'd just neutralized. Corridor secure. Move into secondary objectives. Confirmed. Delta, proceed with Phase 2 elimination protocols. Phase 2. Samantha's mind raced through the implications. Phase 1 had been the initial assault and communications blackout. Phase 2 would likely involve eliminating high-value targets, the VIP visitors, who were somewhere in the facility's conference center. She needed to reach them before the terrorists did. The facility's layout worked in her favor now. Months of routine maintenance rounds had given her intimate knowledge of every corridor, stairwell, and service access point. While the attackers relied on stolen blueprints and hasty reconnaissance, she moved through the building like a ghost who knew every shadow. The conference center was 3 floors up and 2 buildings over. Under normal circumstances, it would be a 5-minute walk through well-lit corridors. But with terrorists systematically clearing each section and the building's security systems compromised, Samantha would need to find an alternative route. The freight elevator. The shaft ran from the basement directly to the executive level, bypassing most of the floors where the attackers were concentrated. It would be risky. If they'd thought to post guards at the elevator banks, she'd be trapped in a confined space with no escape routes. But it was faster than trying to clear each floor individually. Moving through the facility's service corridors, Samantha encountered evidence of the attack's devastating efficiency. Security personnel had been neutralized with precision strikes, their weapons and communication gear stripped away. Emergency response protocols had been systematically disabled, leaving the facility isolated from outside assistance. But she also noticed something that gave her hope: signs of organized resistance. Overturned furniture suggested that some federal personnel had managed to establish defensive positions. Scattered ammunition casings indicated that at least some of the facility's occupants were fighting back. The freight elevator shaft was unguarded, but the elevator car itself was stuck between floors. Samantha examined the cables and counterweight system, calculating load distributions and mechanical stress points. The shaft was 40 feet to the executive level, A climb that would test her physical conditioning but remained within acceptable parameters. As she began her ascent, using the cable guide rails and maintenance ladder bolted to the shaft wall, Samantha's radio crackled with new intelligence. "Alpha Team, this is Command. Be advised that federal personnel are displaying unexpected resistance capabilities. Exercise extreme caution when engaging targets. Command Alpha Leader." What kind of capabilities are we talking about? Unknown federal agent has neutralized multiple operatives using advanced close-quarters combat techniques. Recommend treating all facility personnel as potential special operations assets. Samantha allowed herself a grim smile as she climbed. The terrorists were learning that their intelligence about the facility's occupants had been incomplete. They'd planned for a soft target filled with bureaucrats and trainees. Instead, they were discovering that federal training facilities attracted personnel with diverse and often lethal skill sets. Reaching the executive level, Samantha carefully opened the elevator shaft access panel and peered into the corridor. 2 guards flanked the conference room doors, their attention focused on the main approaches. They hadn't considered that someone might emerge from the elevator shaft behind them, through the conference room's reinforced windows. She could see the VIP visitors huddled around a table while Director Hamilton attempted to coordinate with what remained of his security team. Senator Goldman was speaking rapidly into a satellite phone. Apparently, some communication links had survived the initial attack, but time was running out. Through her captured radio, Samantha heard the terrorist commander issuing new orders. "All teams, prepare for Phase 3. Implement special package protocols in 10 minutes. Special package. The chemical agents she'd seen on the attacker's gear. Samantha had seen similar weapons used in overseas operations, binary chemical compounds that created toxic gas when mixed together. In an enclosed space like the conference room, they would be absolutely lethal within minutes. She had to move now. The 2 guards never saw her coming. Emerging from the elevator shaft with the fluid grace of someone who'd performed similar infiltrations dozens of times, Samantha neutralized both terrorists before they could react. Her movements were precise, economic, designed to incapacitate without creating noise that might alert other attackers. As she approached the conference room doors, Samantha could hear Director Hamilton's voice through the reinforced glass. "I don't care what protocols say. We have senators and Pentagon officials trapped in here while terrorists are systematically eliminating our security personnel." She knocked on the door using a specific pattern: 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Military Morse code for SOS, recognizable to anyone with federal training. The door opened slightly, revealing Hamilton's suspicious face. His expression shifted from wariness to confusion as he recognized the quiet maintenance worker who was somehow armed with military equipment and covered in what appeared to be combat residue. "Lopez, what the hell are you doing here? How did you get past security?" "Sir, we need to evacuate this room immediately. The terrorists are preparing to deploy chemical weapons." Hamilton stared at her for a moment, processing the impossibility of what he was seeing. Behind him, Senator Goldman looked up from her phone call, her eyes widening as she took in Samantha's transformed appearance. "Chemical weapons?" Hamilton's voice cracked slightly. "How could you possibly know that?" Samantha held up the captured radio and tactical gear. "Because I've been tracking their communications and movements for the past 20 minutes. They call it Phase 3, and we have less than 10 minutes before they implement it." The conference room fell silent as the implication sank in. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully orchestrated operations, designed to eliminate America's security leadership using weapons of mass destruction. Deputy Secretary Cross stood up slowly, his face pale but his voice steady. "Ms. Lopez, I think you need to tell us exactly who are." The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Senator Patricia Goldman set down her satellite phone, her eyes locked on Samantha with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Deputy Secretary William Cross remained standing, his hands pressed against the mahogany table as if grounding himself against a reality that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. "Ms. Lopez," Cross repeated, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from years of managing national security crises. "I asked you a question. Who are you?" Samantha checked her watch. 8 minutes until Phase 3 deployment. Through the conference room's reinforced windows, she could see movement in the corridors below. The terrorists were repositioning, preparing for their final assault. Every second spent on explanations was a second closer to chemical weapons being deployed against the nation's security leadership. "Sir, with respect, we need to evacuate immediately. I can explain everything once we're in a secure location." Director Hamilton, still struggling to reconcile the woman standing before him with the quiet maintenance worker he'd barely noticed for 18 months, stepped forward. "Lopez, you just neutralized 4 armed terrorists, infiltrated a secured facility through the ventilation system, and you're carrying equipment that most of my security team couldn't properly identify. You don't get to defer explanations." Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the terrorism expert who'd been observing silently from the corner, suddenly spoke up. "The communication patterns. You knew their tactical frequencies. You understood their operational terminology." Her eyes widened with recognition. "You've encountered these protocols before." Samantha's jaw tightened. The careful anonymity she'd built over 3 years was crumbling, but lives hung in the balance. "Dr. Rodriguez is correct. I have encountered these tactics before. The Revolutionary Liberation Front is using modified Spetsnaz urban warfare protocols adapted for domestic operations. The equipment they're carrying suggests support from hostile foreign actors, likely Russian or Chinese intelligence services. How could a maintenance worker possibly know that?" Senator Goldman demanded. The captured radio crackled with urgent chatter. "Command, all teams report ready for Phase 3 deployment. Awaiting final authorization." 6 minutes, Samantha said grimly. "We need to move now." Cross slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. Before we go anywhere, you're going to tell us who you really are." Samantha looked around the room at faces that represented the highest levels of American security apparatus. These were people who held clearances that accessed the nation's most closely guarded secrets, who made decisions that affected global stability. If she was going to save their lives, they needed to understand what they were dealing with. "My name is Captain Samantha Lopez, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired." The words came out flat, matter of fact. 3 years ago, I led a covert operation in Afghanistan that prevented a coordinated attack on American embassies across Central Asia. The mission was classified under Special Access Program protocols. The room went dead silent. Dr. Rodriguez's face had gone pale, and she was staring at Samantha with something approaching awe. "Operation Silent Thunder," she whispered. "You're the ghost of Kandahar." Hamilton looked confused. "What the hell is the ghost of Kandahar?" Cross answered, his voice heavy with recognition. Captain Lopez led a 12-person team that infiltrated 3 separate terrorist strongholds in a single night. They eliminated 37 hostiles and recovered intelligence that prevented simultaneous attacks on American diplomatic facilities. The operation had a projected survival rate of less than 15%. The after-action reports were sealed, Rodriguez added. But intelligence agencies still study the tactical innovations from that mission. It's considered one of the most successful special operations in recent military history. Senator Goldman was studying Samantha with new interest. "Why didn't this show up in your background check for facility employment?" "Because I requested civilian employment under a witness protection level identity classification," Samantha replied. The mission in Afghanistan generated significant media attention when details leaked. I became a target for both hostile intelligence services and domestic extremist groups who saw me as a symbol of American military intervention. "So you disappeared," Cross said, understanding dawning in his voice. "You took a maintenance job where no one would look twice at you." 5 minutes to Phase 3 deployment. The radio announced. Samantha moved toward the window, studying the terrorists' positioning below. "We can continue this conversation after we survive the next hour. Right now I need to get you to the facility's emergency bunker before they deploy chemical weapons." "The bunker's been compromised," Hamilton said. "My security team tried to reach it 20 minutes ago. The terrorists have it covered with overlapping fields of fire." "Then we create our own safe room." Samantha turned to Cross. "Sir, do you have access to emergency command protocols?" "What kind of protocols?" "The kind that can scramble federal response teams and authorize military intervention on domestic soil." Cross reached for his briefcase, retrieving a secure communication device that looked like a modified tablet. "I have limited emergency authorization, but the terrorists jammed most communication frequencies. Not all of them." Samantha pulled out a compact device from her tactical gear. "Military emergency beacons operate on frequencies that civilian jamming equipment can't touch. But we need to reach the facility's roof to deploy it effectively." Dr. Rodriguez looked out the window at the chaos below. "The roof is 4 floors up through territory controlled by armed terrorists. How do you propose we get there?" "We don't all go." Samantha's voice was calm, but everyone in the room understood the implication. "I create a diversion while you evacuate to a more defensible position. Once I've deployed the beacon and federal response arrives, this situation ends." "That's suicide," Senator Goldman protested. "You'd be facing 12 armed terrorists alone. Actually, it's down to 8. I've already eliminated 4, and my analysis suggests they lost at least 2 more to security personnel in other parts of the facility. 8 against 1 are still impossible odds," Hamilton argued. Samantha allowed herself a slight smile. "Sir, with respect, you're thinking like someone who's never operated behind enemy lines. This isn't about superior numbers, it's about superior positioning, timing, and the element of surprise." 4 minutes to Phase 3, the radio announced. Cross made a decision. "What do you need from us?" "Create a diversion. In 3 minutes, I need you to trigger the facility's fire alarm system. That will force them to adjust their positions and create enough confusion for me to reach the stairwell." "What about the chemical weapons?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "Their deployment requires precise timing and environmental control. If I can disrupt their coordination, the chemical attack becomes significantly less effective." Samantha checked her equipment one final time. "The alarm system controls are in the security office 2 floors down. Can you reach it?" Hamilton nodded. "There's a service elevator that connects directly to the security level. If we can get to the elevator bank, I'll clear your path." Samantha moved toward the conference room door. "Give me 60 seconds, then move fast. No stops, no hesitation, no looking back." As she prepared to leave, Cross called out, "Captain Lopez, why didn't you tell us who you were when this started?" Samantha paused at the door. "Because 3 years ago, after Operation Silent Thunder, I testified before Congress about the psychological cost of that kind of warfare. I told a room full of politicians that turning soldiers into weapons had a human price that couldn't be measured in mission success rates. What did they say? They thanked me for my service and asked if I'd be willing to lead similar operations in the future." Her voice carried a bitterness that spoke of deeper wounds. "I realized that to them, I wasn't a person who'd been through hell and survived. I was a tool to be used until it broke. And now?" Senator Goldman asked quietly. Samantha looked around the room one final time. "Now I'm choosing to be a tool one last time. But this time, it's my choice." She opened the door and stepped into the corridor, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd accepted that the next few minutes would either save lives or end her own. Behind her, the most powerful security officials in America prepared to follow the lead of a woman they'd never noticed, trusting their lives to someone who'd spent 3 years being deliberately invisible. The transformation was complete. Samantha Lopez, maintenance worker, no longer existed. Captain Samantha Lopez, the ghost of Kandahar, had returned to war. 3 minutes to Phase 3 deployment. The radio crackled. Time to move. The corridor outside the conference room stretched before Samantha like a gauntlet designed by someone who understood exactly how to kill professional soldiers. The terrorists had learned from their earlier losses. Gone were the predictable formations and amateur positioning. Now they'd established overlapping fields of fire with designated fallback positions, creating a killing zone that would challenge even elite special operations personnel. Through her scope, Samantha counted 6 hostiles positioned at strategic choke points between her and the stairwell. They'd dragged furniture from adjacent offices to create improvised fighting positions, and their discipline suggested they were the cell's most experienced operators. These weren't the expendable foot soldiers she'd encountered earlier. These were the specialists kept in reserve for the mission's critical phases. 2 minutes to Phase 3 deployment, her captured radio announced. All teams report ready status. Samantha studied the tactical situation with the cold analysis that had made her legendary in Afghanistan. The terrorists controlled the direct approaches, but they'd made a critical assumption that any resistance would come from conventional angles. They'd positioned themselves to repel frontal assault or flanking maneuvers through side corridors. They hadn't anticipated someone who understood 3-dimensional warfare. The facility's architecture included decorative support beams that ran along the ceiling, remnants of the building's original industrial design that had been preserved during renovation. To most people, they were aesthetic features. To someone with Samantha's training, they represented an aerial highway that bypassed every defensive position the terrorists had established, moving with the silent precision that had earned her the nickname Ghost. Samantha climbed onto the ceiling framework 20 feet above the terrorist positions. The support beams were solid steel, easily capable of bearing her weight, but any noise would immediately reveal her position to the hostiles below. Through the ceiling tiles, she could hear fragments of the terrorists' communication. They were speaking in accented English, confirming her suspicions about foreign training, but their tactical terminology was flawless. These weren't mercenaries or ideological extremists. They were professional operators conducting a military mission under the cover of domestic terrorism. Command, this is Alpha Leader. Security resistance has been more significant than anticipated. Recommend accelerating Phase 3 timeline. Negative Alpha. Phase 3 deployment requires precise coordination with extraction protocols. Maintain schedule extraction protocols. Samantha filed that information away as she moved across the ceiling framework. The terrorists weren't planning a suicide mission. They intended to escape after deploying chemical weapons against America's security leadership. That suggested sophisticated planning and resources that went far beyond domestic terrorist capabilities. Reaching a position directly above the stairwell access, Samantha could see the 2 terrorists guarding the critical choke point. They were positioned to cover both approaches, with clear communication lines to their teammates. Standard military doctrine would require eliminating them simultaneously to prevent either from alerting the others. But Samantha had a different plan. Instead of engaging the guards directly, she dropped a smoke grenade through a gap in the ceiling tiles. The device clattered to the floor between the 2 terrorists, immediately filling the corridor with thick white smoke that obscured vision and triggered the facility's automated ventilation response. Contact, stairwell position. Deploy countermeasures. The terrorists' training took over. and they began executing their rehearsed response to smoke deployment. But their countermeasures assumed the attack was coming from ground level. As they repositioned to cover expected approach routes, Samantha dropped through the ceiling behind them. Her knife found the first terrorist's neck before he could turn around. The second guard managed to pivot and bring his weapon up, but Samantha was already inside his effective range. A precise strike to his weapon hand knocked the rifle aside, followed by a combat grappling technique that rendered him unconscious within seconds. "Stairwell secured," she whispered into her captured radio, mimicking the voice patterns she'd heard from the eliminated guards. "Confirmed. Maintain overwatch until Phase 3 completion." Samantha checked her watch, 90 seconds until chemical deployment. Through the stairwell window, she could see movement in the facility's courtyard. Black SUVs were positioning themselves near the building's exits, confirming the extraction protocol intelligence. The terrorists planned to deploy chemical weapons, wait for the VIPs to die, and then escape in the confusion that would follow. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed their target was defenseless. The stairwell door opened behind her, and Samantha spun with her weapon raised before recognizing Director Hamilton's terrified face. Behind him came the others: Cross, Goldman, Rodriguez, all looking like people who'd suddenly found themselves in a nightmare that exceeded their worst-case scenario planning. Asterisk, stairwell is clear, Samantha reported quietly. But we have less than 2 minutes before chemical deployment. The security office is 1 floor down. Can you reach it? Cross nodded, clutching his emergency authorization device. What about you? I'm going to the roof to deploy the emergency beacon. Federal response teams need targeting coordinates for the terrorist extraction vehicles. Dr. Rodriguez grabbed Samantha's arm as she prepared to continue up the stairwell. Captain, I've studied asymmetric warfare scenarios for 15 years. The odds of surviving what you're planning are essentially zero. Doctor, 3 years ago, I led a mission with a 15% survival rate. My entire team came home alive. Samantha's voice carried quiet confidence that seemed to fill the stairwell. Sometimes survival isn't about odds, it's about understanding that failure isn't an option. 1 minute to Phase 3 deployment. The radio announced. Hamilton was staring at Samantha with something approaching awe. All those months, you were right there, cleaning our weapons, maintaining our equipment, listening to us complain about paperwork and training schedules. And we never knew we were working next to a living legend. Sir, legends are stories people tell after the fact. Right now I'm just someone with a job to do. Senator Goldman stepped forward. Captain Lopez, if you survive this, I want you to know that your testimony 3 years ago wasn't ignored. There are people in Congress who've been working to change how we approach military psychological support. Samantha paused, surprised by the admission. Ma'am, your words about the human cost of warfare started conversations that are still happening. In classified briefings, you may have felt like no one was listening, but you were wrong. The moment hung between them, a brief connection across the chaos that reminded Samantha why she'd chosen to serve in the first place. Not for politicians or policies, but for the idea that some things were worth protecting. 30 seconds to Phase 3 deployment. Go, Samantha ordered. Security office, trigger the fire alarms, then find the most defensible position you can. Federal response should arrive within 10 minutes of beacon deployment. As the VIP group disappeared down the stairwell, Samantha continued upward toward the roof access. Each step took her closer to a confrontation that would test every skill she'd developed over years of combat operations. The roof access door was locked, but her breaching charge made quick work of the barrier. She emerged onto the facility's roof under a gray California sky that seemed to reflect the gravity of the situation below. The emergency beacon required 30 seconds to establish satellite connection and upload targeting coordinates. During those 30 seconds, She would be completely exposed on the roof while 8 terrorists somewhere below realized their plan was being compromised. Samantha activated the beacon and began the upload sequence. Through the device's display, she watched as GPS coordinates, facility schematics, and threat assessment data transmitted to federal response centers across the region. Phase 3 deployment initiated, her radio announced. All teams prepare for extraction. Below her, she could hear the hiss of chemical agents being released into the facility's ventilation system. But the fire alarm Hamilton had triggered was forcing the building's air circulation into emergency mode, diluting the chemicals and buying crucial time for any remaining personnel to evacuate. The beacon completed its transmission sequence just as the roof access door exploded inward. 3 terrorists emerged onto the roof, their weapons trained on Samantha's position behind the facility's air conditioning units. "Federal agent, surrender immediately." The lead terrorist's accent was distinctly Eastern European. "Drop your weapons and submit to revolutionary justice." Samantha keyed her radio one final time, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Captain Samantha Lopez, U.S. Army Rangers. Federal response is inbound. Surrender now and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention." The terrorist leader laughed. "Captain Lopez? The Ghost of Kandahar is a maintenance worker at a training facility." "Impossible." "You're about to find out how possible it is," Samantha replied. The final confrontation was about to begin. The rooftop of the Blackwater Federal Training Facility stretched out like an urban battlefield, dotted with air conditioning units, satellite dishes, and ventilation equipment that created a maze of cover and concealment. The morning sun had burned through the earlier clouds, casting sharp shadows that would either hide Samantha or expose her, depending on how well she could control the engagement. The 3 terrorists who'd emerged from the stairwell moved with the coordinated precision of a special operations team. The leader, a tall man with Slavic features and eyes that spoke of too many operations in too many countries, gestured for his teammates to establish a perimeter while he maintained overwatch on Samantha's position. "Captain Lopez," he called out, his accent confirming her suspicions about Eastern European training. "I am Major Alexei Volkov, formerly of Russian Spetsnaz, currently serving the cause of revolutionary liberation. Your reputation precedes you." Samantha remained silent, using the conversation to assess her opponent's positioning and equipment. Volkov carried a modified rifle with attachments she didn't recognize, possibly next-generation optics or targeting systems. His teammates flanked him at textbook intervals, their movements suggesting hundreds of hours of joint training. "The Ghost of Kandahar," Volkov continued, his voice carrying grudging respect. 37 confirmed eliminations in a single night. The Kremlin studied your tactics for months after that operation. Very impressive work. "If you studied my tactics," Samantha replied, shifting position behind an air conditioning unit, "then you know how this ends." Volkov laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Perhaps, but Kandahar was 3 years ago. You have been maintaining rifles and hiding from your own shadow since then. Combat reflexes deteriorate without constant practice." The psychological warfare was sophisticated, an attempt to undermine her confidence by highlighting the gap between her current life and her military peak. But Volkov had made a critical error in his assessment. Samantha hadn't been avoiding combat for 3 years. She'd been preparing for it in ways he couldn't understand. Every day spent maintaining weapons had refined her understanding of ballistics and mechanical precision. Every quiet hour studying facility blueprints had sharpened her tactical analysis skills. Every month of deliberate anonymity had taught her patience and observation that surpassed her younger, more aggressive military persona. The terrorists, too. Volkov's left, a compact man with the build of a former gymnast, began moving to flank her position. His approach was textbook perfect, using available cover while maintaining sight lines to prevent Samantha from repositioning without exposure. But textbook tactics assumed conventional battlefield conditions. Samantha had noticed something during her reconnaissance of the roof that the terrorists had missed. The facility's emergency water system included pressure valves located throughout the rooftop infrastructure. A precisely placed shot could create a high-pressure water burst that would temporarily blind anyone in the immediate area. Her rifle cracked once. The water valve exploded in a geyser that caught the flanking terrorist completely off guard. In the moment of confusion that followed, Samantha moved. She crossed 15 feet of open roof space in a combat sprint that brought her to the cover of a satellite array before Volkov could adjust his aim. The flanking terrorist, temporarily blinded by the water burst, fired wildly in her general direction, his shots going wide. "Impressive improvisation," Volkov called out. "But you are still outnumbered 3-1, and we control the only exit." That's when the facility's fire alarm system finally activated. The piercing wail that filled the air wasn't just notification of Hamilton's success in reaching the security office. It was Samantha's signal that the VIP evacuation had reached the next phase. More importantly, it meant the building's chemical contamination protocols were now active, forcing clean air through the ventilation system and reducing the effectiveness of the terrorists' Phase 3 deployment. But the alarm also provided acoustic cover for movement. Using the sound to mask her footsteps, Samantha repositioned to a vantage point that gave her sight lines on 2 of the 3 terrorists. The tactical situation had shifted in her favor, but she was running out of cover and ammunition. This needed to end quickly. Volkov seemed to understand the same reality. "Enough games," he announced. "Alpha Team, converge on target position. Authorization for lethal force." The 2 subordinate terrorists began their coordinated assault, moving with the kind of disciplined aggression that separated professional soldiers from amateurs. They advanced in bounds, one providing covering fire while the other moved, then reversing roles in a leapfrog pattern that would eventually overwhelm any defensive position. Samantha waited until they were committed to their approach, then did something that violated every principle of defensive warfare. She charged directly at them. The frontal assault was so unexpected that both terrorists hesitated for a critical half-second. In close-quarters combat, half a second was an eternity. Samantha's rifle spoke twice in rapid succession, and both terrorists went down before they could react to her impossible tactics. That left Volkov alone on the roof, and the Russian's demeanor shifted from confident professional to concerned survivor. He'd just watched a maintenance worker eliminate 2 elite special operations personnel, using tactics that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "Remarkable," he said, raising his weapon. "Perhaps your reputation was not exaggerated after all." The final engagement lasted exactly 4 seconds. Volkov's shots shattered the air conditioning unit where Samantha had been positioned, but she was already moving. Her return fire caught him center mass as he attempted to track her movement. The Russian staggered but didn't fall. Body armor had absorbed the impact. His second shot came closer, close enough that Samantha felt the bullet's passage disturb her hair. But close wasn't good enough against someone who'd learned marksmanship in the mountains of Colorado and perfected it in the combat zones of Afghanistan. Samantha's third shot found the narrow gap between Volkov's helmet and body armor, the former Spetsnaz major collapsed. Without another word, the rooftop fell silent except for the continuing wail of the fire alarm and the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Federal response was inbound, drawn by the emergency beacon. Samantha had deployed. She moved quickly to secure the terrorists' weapons and communication equipment. Their radios were already buzzing with urgent chatter from the remaining operatives in the building below, demanding status reports from the roof team. "Roof team, report status immediately." Samantha keyed the microphone, altering her voice to match Volkov's accent and speaking patterns. Roof secure, target eliminated. Proceeding with extraction protocols. Confirmed. All teams to extraction points. Mission parameters have changed. Through her scope, Samantha could see the black SUVs in the facility's courtyard beginning to move toward predetermined rally points. The remaining terrorists were attempting to execute their escape plan, unaware that their leadership was dead and federal forces were minutes away from surrounding the facility. But something else was happening. That changed everything. Through the facility's windows, she could see movement that didn't match terrorist extraction patterns. Federal personnel, people she'd assumed were dead or incapacitated, were emerging from defensive positions throughout the building. The chemical weapons deployment had failed to achieve its intended effect, and the facility's occupants were beginning to organize resistance. Jake Morrison appeared at a second-floor window, carrying an AR-15 that Samantha recognized as one she'd maintained just yesterday. Ashley Williams was visible in another window, helping evacuate injured personnel toward the building's secure areas. The quiet maintenance worker who'd been dismissed and underestimated had become the catalyst for a coordinated defense that was turning the tide of the entire engagement. Samantha's radio crackled with new intelligence. Federal response teams, ETA 3 minutes. All surviving personnel maintain defensive positions and prepare for friendly force coordination. The battle for the Blackwater Federal Training Facility was entering its final phase, and the outcome was no longer in doubt. But for Samantha, standing alone on a rooftop scattered with the bodies of elite foreign operatives, the real battle was just beginning. The woman who'd spent 3 years trying to disappear had just announced her presence to every intelligence agency in the world. There would be consequences for that revelation, implications that would reshape her carefully constructed, anonymous life. But as she watched federal helicopters converge on the facility and saw her former colleagues emerging from hiding to help with the defense, Samantha realized something that surprised her. She was ready for those consequences. The ghost of Kandahar had returned, and this time she wasn't planning to disappear again. The sound of federal helicopters grew louder as Samantha descended from the roof, but her mission wasn't over. Through the captured terrorist communications equipment, she'd learned that 4 operatives remained in the building, attempting to execute a modified extraction plan that involved taking hostages to ensure their escape. The facility's lower levels had become a maze of smoke, emergency lighting, and scattered debris from the morning's battle. Water from the triggered sprinkler systems mixed with chemical residue to create a toxic slurry that made breathing difficult and movement treacherous. But for someone who'd operated in the caves of Afghanistan and the urban warfare zones of Iraq, these conditions were familiar territory. Federal response teams, this is Captain Samantha Lopez, she transmitted on the emergency frequency. 4 hostile operatives remain in the building. They have modified their extraction to include hostage protocols. Request permission to coordinate ground operations. The response came immediately from an authoritative voice that carried the crisp professionalism of Federal Tactical Command. Captain Lopez, this is Agent Sarah Chun, FBI Hostage Rescue Team Leader. We have your emergency beacon data and facility schematics. What's your current status? Rooftop secured. Terrorist leadership eliminated. I have communications intercept equipment and real-time intelligence on remaining hostile positions. Understood. Federal teams are establishing perimeter control, but we need eyes inside for hostage location and threat assessment. Samantha was moving through the facility's service corridors as she coordinated with the incoming response teams. The building she'd known so intimately as a maintenance worker had been transformed into an active combat zone, but her knowledge of every door, passage, and structural detail now served as a tactical advantage that no outside force could replicate. Through a partially destroyed window, she could see black-clad FBI agents establishing sniper positions on surrounding buildings while tactical teams prepared for building entry. The federal response was massive and professionally coordinated, but it would take time to safely extract any hostages without triggering a massacre, time that might not exist. All teams, this is Bravo Leader, came a desperate transmission on. The terrorist frequency. Primary extraction compromised. Implementing Contingency Protocol 7. Prepare demolition charges for facility destruction. Demolition charges. Samantha's blood ran cold as she processed the implications. The terrorists weren't just planning to escape with hostages. They intended to destroy the entire facility and everyone in it rather than allow their operation to be completely neutralized. She keyed her radio to the federal frequency. Agent Chun, intercept indicates terrorists are preparing to demolish the building. This has escalated to a mass casualty scenario. Copy that, Captain. How much time do we have? Samantha checked the terrorist equipment she'd captured from Volkov's team. Among the gear was a tablet displaying what appeared to be a countdown. Timer, 12 minutes and counting down. 12 minutes until detonation. Charges are likely placed at structural support points to ensure complete building collapse. Federal teams are still 8 minutes out from safe entry positions. Can you locate and disarm the demolition charges? The question hung in the air like a challenge that would define everything that followed. Samantha could reach the building's exit points before the charges detonated, ensuring her own survival. But dozens of federal personnel, VIP visitors, and facility staff were still trapped inside, including the people who'd trusted her enough to follow her lead during the crisis. Affirmative, Agent Chun. I'm going after the charges. What followed was the most intense 12 minutes of Samantha's life. The terrorists had positioned their demolition charges with the precision of experienced sappers, placing them at load-bearing support points that would create a cascading structural failure. Each charge was protected by proximity, sensors and backup detonators that would trigger if tampered with incorrectly. But Samantha had advantages that terrorists couldn't have anticipated. Her months of facility maintenance had included structural inspections and electrical system repairs that gave her intimate knowledge of the building's infrastructure. More importantly, her grandfather, the man who'd taught her to shoot in the Colorado mountains, had been a demolitions expert in Vietnam, and he'd shared enough of that knowledge to make her dangerous with explosives. The first charge was located in the building's main support column, protected by a motion sensor that would detonate the device if anyone approached without the proper disarm code. Samantha studied the setup for precious seconds, then did something that would have terrified any bomb disposal expert. She shot out the sensor's power supply from 15 feet away, using her rifle's precision to sever the connection without triggering the backup systems. 8 minutes remaining. The second charge required a different approach. Located in the facility's electrical room, it was surrounded by high-voltage equipment that made direct access impossible. But Samantha remembered that the room's main power coupling could be accessed through an adjacent maintenance shaft, a route she'd used dozens of times for routine electrical repairs. Crawling through the narrow access tunnel while explosives counted down above her head tested every aspect of her psychological conditioning. This wasn't combat against human opponents, where training and instinct could provide advantages. This was a race against time and technology, where a single mistake would kill everyone in the building. 6 minutes remaining. The third charge presented the greatest challenge. The terrorists had learned from their earlier losses and positioned this device in the facility's main conference room, the same room where Samantha had revealed her identity to the VIP visitors hours earlier. But they'd also rigged it with a dead man switch connected to one of the surviving operatives. Through the conference room's reinforced glass, Samantha could see the setup. A terrorist with his hand on a detonator, surrounded by federal personnel who'd been taken hostage during the chaos. Any attempt to neutralize the operative would result in immediate detonation. 4 minutes remaining. Agent Chun, I need options for the conference room situation, Samantha transmitted quietly. Sniper teams are in position, but the angle doesn't. Allow for a clean shot without risking hostage casualties. Samantha studied the tactical situation with the kind of cold analysis that had made her legendary in Afghanistan. The terrorist was positioned to watch all normal approach routes, but he'd made this same mistake as his colleagues throughout the operation. He wasn't thinking 3-DIMEN, SIONALLY. The conference room ceiling included the same decorative support beams that Samantha had used earlier. But this time, instead of using them for movement, she would use them for something far more dangerous. 2 minutes remaining, moving with the silent precision that had earned her the nickname Ghost. Samantha positioned herself directly above the terrorist's location. Through a gap in the ceiling tiles, she could see him clearly, a young man whose nervousness suggested this was his first major operation. His finger hovered over the detonator switch, but his eyes were focused on the doorways and windows where he expected threats to appear. 1 minute remaining. Samantha dropped through the ceiling directly onto the terrorist's position. The impact knocked him unconscious before he could trigger the detonator, and she immediately began the disarmament sequence for the final explosive device. 30 seconds remaining. The disarmament required cutting 3 specific wires in precise sequence, while avoiding 2 others that would trigger immediate detonation. Samantha's hands were steady despite the impossible time pressure, guided by memories of her grandfather's patient instruction decades earlier in the Colorado wilderness. 10 seconds. The timer stopped at 0:03. The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Samantha's ragged breathing and the distant noise of federal teams finally breaching the building's perimeter. Through the reinforced windows, she could see FBI agents and military personnel flooding into the facility to secure the remaining areas and provide medical assistance to casualties. "Agent Chun, this is Captain Lopez," she transmitted, her voice surprisingly steady considering what she'd just accomplished. "All demolition charges neutralized. Building is secure for federal entry. Outstanding work, Captain. Federal medical teams are inbound for casualty assessment and treatment." Director Hamilton, who'd been among the hostages in the conference room, stared at Samantha with something approaching disbelief. "How did you know how to disarm military-grade explosives?" Samantha was already moving toward the window, watching as federal response teams established control of the facility's perimeter. "Sir, there are still operational security concerns. We need to debrief all personnel and ensure no additional threats remain." But Hamilton wasn't letting it go. "Lopez, in the past 4 hours, you've demonstrated advanced marksmanship, close-quarters combat expertise, tactical coordination, and now bomb disposal capabilities. That's not normal maintenance. Worker skill set." Through the window, Samantha could see media vehicles beginning to arrive at the facility's gates. The story of the terrorist attack would be front-page news within hours, and her role in stopping it wouldn't remain secret for long. The careful anonymity she'd built over 3 years was about to be shattered completely. "Sir," she said quietly, watching the circus of federal agents, military personnel, and journalists gathering outside, "I think my maintenance career just ended." 6 months after the Blackwater Federal Training Facility attack, Captain Samantha Lopez stood before a joint session of Congress, but this time the experience was radically different from her testimony 3 years earlier. The hearing room was packed with media representatives, military officials, and civilian security experts who understood that they were witnessing a watershed moment in American counterterrorism policy. The attack had fundamentally changed how the federal government approached domestic security threats. The revelation that foreign special operations personnel could infiltrate and nearly destroy a major training facility had sent shockwaves through intelligence communities worldwide. More importantly, the fact that a single individual with exceptional training could neutralize such a threat had sparked intense debate about how America identified and utilized its most capable personnel. Captain Lopez, Senator Patricia Goldman began, her voice carrying none of the skepticism that had characterized Samantha's previous congressional appearance. Your actions during the Blackwater incident prevented what intelligence analysts believe would have been the most devastating terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. Can you walk us through the decision-making process that led to your intervention? Samantha adjusted the microphone before responding. The woman who sat at the witness table bore little resemblance to the quiet maintenance worker who'd once cleaned rifles in anonymity. Her uniform displayed new decorations, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Defense Superior Service Medal, and ribbons that spoke of classified operations conducted in the months following Blackwater. Senator, the decision to engage wasn't complex, Samantha began. American lives were in immediate danger from a coordinated attack by foreign operatives. My training and position gave me unique capabilities to respond to that threat. The choice was between action and allowing mass casualties to occur on American soil. Deputy Secretary William Cross, who'd been among the hostages she'd rescued, leaned forward from his position on the panel. Captain, intelligence analysis suggests the Revolutionary Liberation Front was a front organization for a much larger operation. Can you elaborate on the foreign involvement you discovered? Sir, equipment analysis and communication intercepts confirmed that the attacking force included former Spetsnaz personnel with access to advanced weapons and explosives. The operation was designed to test American response capabilities while eliminating key security leadership. This wasn't domestic terrorism, it was a probe by hostile foreign actors testing our vulnerabilities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez at Terrorism, expert who'd witnessed Samantha's transformation firsthand, spoke next. Captain, your background check for the maintenance position showed no indication of your military specialization. How did someone with your capabilities end up in such an anonymous role? This was the question Samantha had been preparing for since the attack. The careful balance between operational security and public accountability that defined modern military service. Dr. Rodriguez, after Operation Silent Thunder in Afghanistan, I requested assignment to a position where I could continue serving without the public exposure that combat recognition brings. The psychological cost of high-profile military service can be significant, and I believed I could be more effective in a support role. But that anonymity nearly prevented you from responding to the Blackwater attack, Cross observed. With respect, sir, it also allowed me to respond in ways that wouldn't have been possible if I'd been in a high-visibility position. The terrorists planned their operation based on intelligence about facility personnel. They knew about Director Hamilton, Training Supervisor Morrison, and other key staff. They didn't know about me because I'd deliberately remained invisible. Senator Goldman consulted her notes before continuing. Captain, since the Blackwater incident, you've been reassigned to a new position within the Department of Defense. Can you discuss your current responsibilities? Samantha paused, considering how much she could reveal about classified programs. Senator, I'm currently serving as the Director of Advanced Personnel Assessment for the DoD. My role involves identifying individuals with exceptional but underutilized capabilities within federal service. The implications of that statement rippled through the hearing room. In the months following Blackwater, Samantha had become the architect of a revolutionary program that sought to identify and properly utilize personnel whose true capabilities had been overlooked by conventional assessment methods. How many individuals have you identified through this program? Rodriguez asked. To date, we've reassessed over 2,000 federal employees and military personnel. Approximately 15% have demonstrated capabilities significantly beyond their current assignments. We've recommended advanced training and reassignment for 300 individuals whose talents were being wasted in routine positions. The numbers were staggering. The federal government had been systematically underutilizing hundreds of highly capable individuals who'd been relegated to anonymous support roles, either through bureaucratic oversight or personal choice. Can you provide specific examples? Goldman pressed. A cybersecurity specialist working as a data entry clerk who had actually developed advanced intrusion detection algorithms in her spare time. A former Army Ranger serving as a parking enforcement officer who possessed language skills and cultural knowledge that made him invaluable for overseas operations. A Navy SEAL veteran working in postal services who had been conducting unauthorized security assessments of federal facilities for years. Each example highlighted the same fundamental problem that Samantha's own experience had revealed. The federal government's personnel systems were designed to process average capabilities, not exceptional ones. Individuals with unique talents often fell through the cracks or deliberately chose anonymity to avoid the bureaucratic complications that came with recognition. The Blackwater incident demonstrated that our enemies understand this vulnerability, Samantha continued. They plan operations based on the assumption that American facilities are staffed by average personnel with routine capabilities. When they encounter individuals with exceptional training, their operational planning falls apart. Cross nodded thoughtfully. So your program is essentially weaponizing the federal workforce by identifying hidden capabilities? Sir, I'd characterize it as properly utilizing American talent in service of national security. Every individual we've identified who's already serving their country. We're simply ensuring their service matches their capabilities. The hearing continued for another hour, covering operational security protocols, budget allocations, and oversight mechanisms for the new program. But the real significance of Samantha's testimony extended far beyond policy discussions. 3 years earlier, she'd sat in a similar room feeling like a tool being evaluated for future use. Today, she was the architect of a system designed to ensure that no one else would face the choice between hiding their capabilities and being exploited for them. As the hearing concluded, Senator Goldman made a final observation. Captain Lopez, your journey from anonymous maintenance worker to program director represents a fundamental shift in how we think about public service. Do you have any advice for federal employees who might be underutilizing their own capabilities? Samantha considered the question carefully. Through the hearing room's windows, she could see the Washington, D.C. skyline where thousands of federal employees were working in positions that might not fully utilize their talents. Senator, excellence doesn't require recognition to be valuable. Every person serving their country, whether in visible leadership roles or anonymous support positions, contributes to our collective security. But excellence unused is excellence wasted. If you have capabilities that could better serve your country, there are now systems in place to identify and properly utilize those talents. After the hearing, Samantha found herself on the Capitol steps surrounded by media representatives, asking questions she couldn't answer and seeking details about classified programs she couldn't discuss. The anonymity she'd once cherished was permanently gone, replaced by a visibility that came with both opportunities and risks. But as she walked toward the waiting government vehicle that would take her back to the Pentagon, Samantha reflected on how much had changed since that morning 6 months ago when she'd been cleaning rifles at Blackwater. Jake Morrison had completed advanced tactical training and was now serving with a federal rapid response team. Ashley Williams had parlayed her maintenance experience into a position with the FBI's Technical Operations Division. Even Director Hamilton had requested reassignment to a role that better utilized his operational planning capabilities. The quiet woman who'd once been invisible had become the catalyst for a transformation that was reshaping how America identified and utilized its human resources in service of national security. That evening, as Samantha reviewed files for the dozens of federal employees whose capabilities her program had identified, she came across a familiar name, Maria Santos, a custodial worker at a Navy facility in San Diego who had somehow managed to complete advanced engineering coursework while working night shifts to support her family. According to the assessment, Santos possessed technical knowledge that could revolutionize naval propulsion systems, but she'd never had the opportunity to apply. Her education in a professional setting, Samantha smiled as she flagged Santos's file for immediate review. Tomorrow she would make a phone call that would change another person's life. Just as the terrorist attack at Blackwater had changed her own, the ghost of Kandahar had found her true calling, ensuring that excellence could serve its country regardless of where it chose to hide. In a world where threats could emerge from unexpected directions, America's greatest strength would always be the hidden capabilities of ordinary people who chose to serve extraordinarily when their country needed them. Some heroes charge into battle. Others stand quietly in the shadows, cleaning rifles and waiting for the moment when their true service begins. Both kinds of heroes make their country proud, and sometimes, if the country is very fortunate, it discovers them before it's too late. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.